Greetings, fellow members of the Esoteric Order of Gamers! Well, as you may know, I play some Games Workshop games. I played them for quite a long time, actually. Let me see now, it was back in about 1978 when I got my first Games Workshop product. I feel so old, and yet, how do I look so young? Anyway, recently something very exciting happened. If you're a fan of the EAG, you already know I got on the Games Workshop preview list, so occasionally they send me something nice to check out, which is fantastic. Now, I love their big box specialist type games, but I also do very occasionally play Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000. And for the first time, I got a miniature from Games Workshop. How exciting! It is the Swampboss Skumdrekk for the Orruk war clans. It's a very nice figure, and in fact I bought the Dominion set, the new starter set for the new edition of Age of Sigmar myself, and I liked the Swamp Orcs so much. They're called the Cruel Boys, actually. I liked them so much I thought I'm going to get an army of these because I just like the swampy orc look. It's great. So I was going to buy this one, so it was really nice to get it free. Thank you, Games Workshop. I very much appreciate it. And in return for sending me this lovely freebie, I am going to do a video on it showing you how to build it and paint it. So let's get started. Well, here we are then, the Swampboss Skumdrekk. It comes in this attractive little box, and you can see there are two variations, different guys on the top. So I'm going to see if you can build them both and magnetize them. I don't know. I can't tell, but we'll find out. Let's see what's inside. We've got our little construction manual book here, which I'll be following carefully. There it is. Got a big base, nice big base, and 3 sprues of stuff. Now, of course, you want a nice set of clippers. These are my red grass clippers, and they're excellent. Now, you're probably thinking, but the bit's broken off, and that's my fault. Yep, I tried to use a precision instrument to do something aggressive. I was trying to open something. That was dumb, and the little tine broke off. So I'm getting a new pair soon, but I'm going to see if I can still survive. But these are really good clippers. I highly recommend them. Red Grass Games. Of course, I also use their wet palette all the time, and they're really nice people as well, so good people to support. So this is a great set of precision clippers. Now, this is something I really like in the Games Workshop construction manuals. You've got a picture here of the two variants, and they've coloured the bits that are different. This is so handy because I can immediately see which bits are going to be the same throughout, which is, of course, is the body in the cage of that's hanging off the lizard thing. That's the same, it's all in grey, and I know that the top of each figure is different, so I should be able to build those separately if they don't share components and magnetise them to the legs of the rider. And of course the head is different as well. That is really, really handy. I can see that in a glance. Now, there's nothing more boring than watching me clip out lots of little pieces of plastic from a sprue, so I won't subject you to too much of that. Just know that I'm clipping them as close to the piece as I can with my clippers, and of course making sure that I don't chop off any detail or anything, but with these precision clippers you can get a very nice clean cut. So I take out my pieces and I tend to take them out and then place them on the diagram as I go so I can keep track of them. And then I can say, okay, I'm going to build this bit. So I take the pieces for that bit, build it, I'm done. So here's my first page of bits all ready to put together. Now, mostly I actually only clean all the nubs of plastic off and everything when the pieces are built, and this saves a bit of time because sometimes you can't see them, they get hidden away. However, there are some instances where you want to be careful. For example, this little piece of twig or branch or whatever goes onto there, and there are some nubs there that'd be hard to get to once you glue it on. So just check that before you do it, and you can clean this off quite easily. I do all my cleaning off with a scalpel like that, and just carefully scrape off those little nubs. If there's any flash lines, of course, or mould lines, I should say, or flash, just clean them off. You can use the edge of the scalpel to just scrape them off easily, or you can use the special Games Workshop tool, but really it's the same thing as just using a scalpel like that. And then I can place that on. Alternatively, you can go through and clean up every piece perfectly. If you want to be that perfect, it's up to you. And I'll be putting these together with Contactor Professional Plastic Glue by Revel. I find this really handy because it's got this long needle applicator, which is really good. Now here's a tip for you. If this thing gets clogged, just take it out, pull it out. Actually, you don't even have to pull it out. That seems to be... Oh, there we go. There we go. You can pull it out. Hold it with a piece of some tweezers or something so it doesn't get hot and hurt your fingers. But then just get a match or a gas lighter or whatever and just burn the end of it. Just heat it up a little bit. As I said, don't hold it with your fingers because it'll burn your fingers. But that will actually burn the glue that's clogged in the end of it. It took me a while to discover this trick because... this used to get clogged a lot and it would annoy me. You can even do it with it still stuck in there like that and just burn it just for a few seconds. It'll go a little bit red and there'll be a little as it burns the clogged up glue and it'll be clear again. Really handy tip. So let's start putting these together. We've got this top here, this top piece, and they go together like so. As always, don't use too much glue. Try and keep your glue kind of towards the inside where it's going to be hidden when it squirts out. You don't want it to squirt out too much on the outside. And of course, always do a dry fit so you know where it's going to, or how it's going to fit, and which pieces you're going to need to glue. Like that. Hold it for a few moments while it sets, and you're done. You can also use your finger, of course, to wipe off any excess glue that squirts out. This bit's just a little bit tricky, but this flat piece goes towards the front, if that is at the back. And then it sort of slides in there and it's easy to line it up with these pieces at the back like that. Kind of a little tricky piece, it just sort of floats in the middle there. So just take note of where that contacts the main piece. Take it out, put some glue in there. And then put this back in. There we go, it's just a little bit fiddly, but it does sort of slip into place eventually when you get it right. And there we go, we have that central body piece. Then we've got these two sticks, and as I said, I cleaned these two bits up beforehand. They fit against those two little nubs on the saddle. That goes very cleanly there. And then there's another one on the other side. Our lizard is taking shape. Next thing we have is this lizard arm, and it's got two claws that attach. There and there. This is one of these instances where there a little bit of nub of plastic is on the bit where it's going to contact, so I'll just clean that off quickly. It might need a little bit of a clean up with a bit of green stuff later on. There's a bit of a line showing where it attaches. Sometimes with some of these joins you actually do want to leave a little bit of excess plastic glue. You can put it in there and smooth it in and it will fill the gap a little bit. Act as sort of a semi-gap filler. So this should attach onto here quite nicely. Again, there's a little nub of plastic there. Just cut that off. Bit of glue around the edge. Of course, the great thing about Games Workshop kits is that they're so precision made that everything fits together so cleanly. And I love bits like this which actually fit in there so you can't see the join at all. I mean, you can see the join where that thumb joins. That's fine, but most of the time you get these really hidden joins, which is just lovely. And of course, plastic glue, because it melts plastic, it can melt little gaps together. Now we've got another arm here, and again that's got a little finger to attach. There it goes. Wipe the excess off, and that goes on the other side. Fits in there, so a bit of glue. Two arms, it's happening. Then we have this front piece, goes around this way with the bits of wood poking out the front here, and this little piece goes in there. So that pops in there, and then this goes on to the front of the piece we've already made. So let's see what it, so that's going to fit, this bit at the top is going to glue, and these two little holes, and really just around the whole thing. So let's put it there. I am being a little bit lazy with my cleaning off of bits of plastic. I should do it as I go, but I'm doing this fast. There we go, look at that. Looking fantastic already. Look at this, this is like just some kind of floating monster already, isn't it? Nice, we've completed the first page of the instructions. Let's move on. Righto, let's get on to the hindquarters of the beast. And we've got this lovely large piece here. And this bit goes at the back. This is his back leg. Attaches in there. You can see nubs of plastic left over from the sprue. I will clean those up later. I'm just, as I said, going at high speed, and I thought I'd just do them last. But any places where the plastic joins, of course, make sure you remove the nubs. Then there's this piece. So there's a line of glue along there on the back to the top of the tail, and that just fits in like so. Then there's the other whole side of the beast, which fits like that. Glue all around that. And there we go. And again, those join lines being hidden underneath the drapery, which is lovely. And there's the basic hindquarters of the beast. Make sure that tail section draws together nicely. Just hold everything together for a few moments while the glue sets. Now we attach this piece, and the thing to remember is that the ends of the wood on this piece point backwards now. So that attaches here and around here, like that. Then there's a couple of feet. One there. While that's drying, we'll do the tail. It's got an end piece that goes into there. Like that. And then we're going to put all this on the base and attach it together. So if we get our front piece here and our back piece, they will of course fit together like so. Look at that. It's amazing, isn't it? Look at all the detail in there, and yet it just all fits together perfectly. It's quite astonishing. I think Games Workshop has some kind of precision software that's made for aircraft design or something, which has been adapted to create their models. So it's super precise. There we go. It's really coming together now. That looks great. Now before I attach this to the base, and it is just going to glue onto the base like so, I'm going to go over this model and cut out all the little plastic knobs that are left. See, little ones like that. And also just clean up any mold lines or pieces where where the two pieces have attached together. And this is where you can just scrape them a bit, and that will get rid of the line where they attach. If there's any larger gaps, you can use green stuff, but really doing this should be enough. And I'll just clean it up all over the model so I can get rid of those while it's still easy to access them without the base on. As always, when using a scalpel, be very careful of your fingers. Make sure you don't cut yourself. Now, when it comes to cleaning mold lines and bits of plastic off and things like that, I'm careful, but I'm not super careful about it. Some people might spend ages and ages on this step, but I find it a very boring step, and I just don't want to spend too much time on it. So I get rid of the obvious lines, but then I wait until I've actually primed the model to see where the real areas are that I'm going to see any problems, and then fix them then. The reason is I prime in white rather than black, and when you prime something in white, it's very easy to see where there are mold lines and excess bits of plastic and everything. So it's actually easier to clean them off once you've primed the figure, because they're so easy to see. And so what you can do is prime it, clean them off, and then just retouch those areas that you've fixed up. And in general, this ends up being a lot faster than really obsessively going over the whole model and cleaning up every single little mold line. Now you can see I've got a little gap there where I've possibly attached that a bit hastily, but that's all right. It's hidden under there. No one's going to see it. If that was a problem, I could put some green stuff in, but who's going to see it? This is the difference between, I think, putting together figures for gameplay and those for display or for competition, painting competitions, things like that. I always put together figures for gameplay. I want to paint them so they look good, but I don't want to be obsessive about making them absolutely perfect because there's just not enough hours in the day, and there are so many figures that need painting. I can't afford to spend hours and hours and hours and hours on just one figure. Well, you know, I do spend hours and hours and hours on one figure, but when I see those Twitter posts where people say, look, I've spent the entire day doing this arm, and they just show this absolutely perfect arm, and I just think, how do you have the time or the patience? I just don't really have any interest in achieving that level of perfection. I just want a nicely painted figure that I can play games with. But that's just my philosophy. You may not agree. So we've got that body, and so we can put this tail on as well, of course. This is going to go on, and this tail you should probably put on while you're attaching it to the base because you want the tail to sit flat on the base. It sits flat on this on the bottom of the tail. Okay, here's our base. I'm going to put some glue on the feet. Where else does it attach? It also attaches apparently on the knuckle here. So yeah, a little bit on the knuckle. And then let's just position it so it's comfortable on the base and see where this tail's going to go. That wants to sit on the base as well. So if we can do all this before it dries. There we go. Let's forward a bit. That looks pretty good. Let's make sure this tail is attaching properly. Especially when I hold that so those the base of the tail and the tail are glued together properly. And just let that dry. Okay, that's looking really nice, coming along well. Now there's sort of a cage arrangement that goes over the top here. First we've got this piece. Where's it gone? This one. That attaches there. I think I'm going to keep this one separate because it'll be easier to paint separately because it's got chains there. I'm going to dry brush and stuff. So I'll keep that separate because I can just paint it and then glue it on there at the end. It should be nice. Then there's some cages, and here are the little pieces here. And one thing I really appreciate here is that there are two of these cages, and they have a tiny little notch at the top which is actually keyed to the piece that it matches. You can see there's another piece which is exactly the same, but it has a different hole in the top, so it doesn't fit. I really like that. So let's glue this little cage together. Such a beautiful detailed piece. You know, back in the very, very early days of wargaming, in the early 80s, I used to buy miniatures, and they were all made from metal, of course. For a long time, miniatures were always metal. You just did not get this level of fine detail and precision. Says the old guy, let me tell you about the old days. So we've got this little cage base here, and there's 3 tiny holes in that, and a couple of other little dots around the base, and that fits in like so. There's our cage. Let me out of this cage, yeah. A little Genesis snippet there. And that attaches to the end of this strut. There we go. And that's another piece I'll probably paint separately because it does hang off the end like that. And I think it'll be a lot easier to paint that separately and then attach it later. And of course there's a piece over the other side which is exactly the same except a mirror image. There we go. So we have one of these cages hanging on either side of the lizard, and as I said, I'll paint those separately because it'll be easier that way. There's another tiny cage made up of 3 very similar pieces, which also attaches to the side of the lizard. Again, I'll keep that one separate and attach it later. So we've got 2 different riders. The first one is the Swampboss Skumdrekk. These names. We've got a little torso piece here, and it's got a little cloak that goes on the back. Oh, I apologise for that hum in the background. That's me preheating the oven for dinner. I'm sure it's not too offensive a sound for you. That goes on there. And then he's got a rather elaborate piece of coins and things that goes on the front. That pops neatly on here. There's his chest. Then we've got 2 legs, and I think we'll be using these 2 legs for both different types of boss. So those 2 go together, and they are sitting on this nice looking little seat. There he is, sitting on the seat. Now, Swampboss has got this little head, but he's also got this elaborate mask on, and of course it's going to be impossible to paint that face after putting the mask on, so I'm going to leave those 2 pieces separate. What I am is going to just put his head on top of the body, and then I'll paint the helmet separately and pop it on later. There he is. He's got a tiny, tiny piece of hand that goes on the end here. It's a very tiny piece. It just goes onto his hand. The trick is that the... almost lost it. So it goes over his finger, so it just goes... That end bit goes over the finger and then it fits there nicely. I've got a brown shag pile underneath my working space and it drives me bonkers. I've got to get rid of it because it's the number of pieces I've lost in that brown shag pile. It's actually grey. No, it's not brown, it's grey. And so grey pieces of plastic, they just go into that shag pile and are lost forevermore. And they'll show up again months and months later. That's the weird thing. They never completely disappear. They just go into another dimension and then come back later on. So there's the top of him, and I'm not going to attach him to the base because I want to magnetize that so I can swap the body. But I will attach his arm, which fits on like this. So that's him. And then we go on to one of the heads. There are 2 different heads. We've got this thing. It's got a big, disgusting tongue. Okay, this is tricky. Oh, I see. It actually goes in. Oh, there we go. You've got to put the end of the tongue through there. That's another little trap for the unwary. And then you can put the other side on because the tongue comes out the side of the mouth. As much as they try to illustrate these things, sometimes you only realise them when you put the bits together. There's a little bit on the front here. It's a tiny, tiny piece. Please don't drop this into the shag pile. There we go. Little snout right just at the front. And then there's more pieces. There are more pieces on the side, which I think I'm just going to be lazy and put them on there and paint around them. So a bit of paint on, bit of glue on the top. Pop that in there. A bit more. I think I can paint around that. And then we have a sort of neck piece, which is, we've got this piece here. They've got their own neck pieces, which is fantastic. It's so good that they don't reuse pieces for the 2 different variants. So you can have the 2 different variants and then magnetize them so you can make a choice. Nothing worse than having variants on a figure but not being able to have both variants. Now we get our head and we've got this collar piece. Looks like these little spikes are facing towards the head. So let's put that on there. And then the back of the collar goes onto our neck. And there we have it. A spectacular looking lizard head. That's one variation. We've got another variation, and that is with the Snatcher Boss. And that's got a different torso on the Orruk sitting on top of it, and a different lizard head as well. Right, let's put together our second rider. We've got this piece here. We've got a body piece that fits there. Pretty similar construction to the first one. He's got a front piece. I've just spilt a bit of Agrax Earthshade on there while I was painting something else. That's why it's stained. That's that. We've got his head. That goes onto the neck. Looking like something out of Mad Max. And there's a little notch there that fits with a bit there. Now this will go on the same pair of legs as the original one. Then I'm just going to glue the 2 arms and put on this chain arrangement. There he is holding that fantastic grappling hook. So put that aside. And then we've got our second head. Got all the pieces down here. So we have the side of the head, and this one doesn't have a tongue. It's got sort of an underslung toothy jaw arrangement, and you end up with this lovely toothy jaw. Look at those big teeth. This again gets attached to one of these, and we want there's a side of the lock there that's decorated. The other side is just flat, so I have this side of the lock coming out towards the face. And then we make up the neck. And I should say, of course, there are 2 bits of glue here as well that attach these reins. And I didn't do that on the first one, but I'll go back and make sure that's attached properly, because it's just a little detail like that. So when you've attached the neck, make sure these little reins are gluing together. And then we have our 2 different heads. So the next thing I'm going to do is put my magnets in, and I will actually glue these, this little throne and feet. They go on here. Right, to do the magnetizing, I've just got a handheld drill bit like this with, that's probably a 1mm drill in it. I'll just use this to drill a sort of guide hole right in the middle of the waist. And then this is a 6mm drill bit that I've just put a bit of gaff tape around it so I can hold it, and I'll drill a much wider hole. I just have to be careful I don't damage anything that's going to be seen. Now the magnets I'm using here are 6mm by 1mm, so they've got quite a large surface area, but they're not too thick, and hopefully this will give me enough strength to hold the piece in place. That fits pretty well, maybe just a little bit deeper on the hole. Now I could just put this straight in with super glue, but I find it's good to use a bit of green stuff, which I have here, and this is a modelling putty, and this will just give it a bit of a stronger hold. So I have an equal amount of blue and yellow stuff. With a bit of water, I'm just blending these 2 together, just fold them around so they blend into a green colour, and I'll use a mix of a ball of this and some super glue to hold my magnet in place. Let's put some super glue in the spot, get a bit of my green stuff, roll it into a little ball, pop it in the hole, put a little bit more super glue on the top, and then take my magnet and squeeze it in. There we go. And that's a pretty clean fit, as you can see. That should work quite well. So the next thing is to make sure my polarities are right. So I can feel that that attaches like that. So the important thing for me is to make sure that this end goes up into the waist of the figure. So just to remind myself of that, I'll put a little dot on the top with a permanent marker, and remember that that goes up into the figure, and that way I don't get my polarities stuffed up. So I'll take one of these, and it's the same thing. I'm just going to drill a pilot hole right in the middle, then use my larger drill to make a larger hole. There we go, there's my hole. Bit of super glue, little ball of green stuff, bit more super glue, making sure that goes in like so. So I can just really take it off, and that dot on it reminds me that I'm getting it in the right side. And that should work pretty well because it's not sticking out, it's lined up with the base. So let's just test it out. Perfect! Absolutely perfect. Look at that. That's quite a snug, strong fit. There we go. So I'll do exactly the same with the other figure, and we'll have magnetised our bosses. And really, I'll use exactly the same technique to attach the head, which will be even easier. The other thing is it's easy on this side because it's flat. There's nothing here. Here I've packed the heads with some green stuff, so that's a good basis for putting the magnet on there. On this side it's a bit trickier because you drill a hole in there and it just goes through into emptiness. So you've got to be careful here with a bit of green stuff. And I tend to just put a bit of super glue around there as well, just to give it the added strength. Put a bit of super glue over the hole, get your magnet, and then just squash it until it's kind of flat. And you may want to use some non-magnetic tool to help you do this. And then scrape off the excess green stuff. Probably gone just a little bit too deep, a little bit deeper than I wanted to. So I'll put another magnet in there. Bit of super glue on the first one. Put another one there, and there we go, that one's sitting flush. Oops, oh, I pushed it too far. You've got to be really careful. See, I had it, everything was fine there. If I use magnets, I can pull it out again quickly before it dries. There we go. Let's try again. There we go. So a little bit tricky, but just press it so it gets in there flush. And then we'll put magnets in the other side, and really I've just got to eyeball this and see where they line up. I can see that pretty much is in the middle of that area there, so make sure my polarities are right. The other way to check with polarities is so you don't pull out the magnet there, is to just do the opposite one. So as soon as you feel that resistance, you know that it's supposed to be the other way around. So I can mark this side, and I know that goes into here. Bit of glue, make sure that black dot is facing inwards, and put it roughly where I think it's going to go. There we go. Because that green stuff is still wet, let's just test it out. Yep, perfect. Make sure that's just right, and then that is going to thoroughly dry overnight. Again, I'll do this one, give it a quick test. Perfect. I'm going to let all of that dry overnight so it's thoroughly dry, and then tomorrow prime these and get started on the painting. Okay, it's the next morning and that's all dried, and the magnetizing has worked really well. You can see that pops in there, and then I can pick myself a torso. There he is. So there's one variation. What a fantastic figure. Doesn't that look great? Then we get the other head can go on there, and the other character. There he is. Just looking great. Love it. And of course there'll be the cages hanging off and everything when I do that. So let's do the base. And I've got a piece of paper under here to catch all the excess stuff. This is my ground kitty litter. It's clay, as I said, and you can get it really fine down to almost dust, but you can get a nice range of rocks as well. I find it really good. I've got some white glue here, PVA glue, so squirt some of that on, get myself an old brush and put some of this glue around here. And I'm just going to do patches because I also want to use some of the Astro Granite stuff as well to get a bit of a swampy look. So there we go, just some patches, and then I'll get some of this and just chuck it on. And then carefully shake it off. And that gives me just some thicker patches, as you can see. When I say thicker, larger rocks and everything, which is great. Let's just let that dry. Now that's thoroughly dry, I've got some Astro Granite, the technical paint, textured paint. This stuff is great. I use it for most of my bases these days, just because it's so much faster than mucking around with other stuff. Mix a little bit of water with it just so it goes on a bit easier. Got an old brush, and I'll just dab it into the spaces I didn't use kitty litter. And I might just mix it up a little bit with the kitty litter as well, so obviously there's a nice transition between the two. And because the kitty litter is dry, but still moving around, it'll mix with it quite a bit. Once this step is thoroughly dry, I'll then get some more white glue and mix it with quite a bit of water so it's very thin, and then just dab that over the whole bit where I've used the kitty litter, and that kind of seals the layer a bit. And you can see a lot comes off when I'm doing this, so sealing it with a little bit of white PVA is that final touch to make sure that it all stays solid. Now of course I could go to town on this base, I could do so much more. There's a lot of space on it. You could get leftover bits of model and add things to it and stuff, but I don't tend to bother too much with that because it takes so much time, and these are, as I said, gaming figures, not display figures. So you can see that's coming together pretty well. And after all this is done, it's time to prime the figure and get ready for painting. Now, a lot of people prime in black for some strange reason that I've never understood. I find priming in white so much easier because I can see all the detail and it takes colour better. I don't know where this crazy black priming habit started. So for me, it's Corax white all the way. This, by the way, is how I've attached these extra pieces to a board with big blobs of blue tack, so I can easily spray them from all angles. Alright, let's get on to painting the Swampboss Skumdrekk. Here's my usual painting area. I've gone through this in other painting videos, but if you haven't seen those, I've got my racks of paints. I've got them arranged sort of roughly by hue, so it's very easy for me to grab a paint. There's contrast paints over there, then we go through the hues, and then over there we have metallics and washes. So a pretty good range of paints, but really with this figure we're going to be using very few paints because it really just uses a few colours. It's going to be quite easy. You can see I've already done the base colour for the lizard itself, and I've used Death World Forest for that, and I put on the first base coat of that. And of course, when you're doing your base coats, keep them relatively thin. It's better to do a couple of thin coats than one thick coat that obscures detail. So with this one, if you look up close, you can see that that is just one coat. It's quite thin, it's a little bit blotchy. I'll give that another thin coat, and then we'll wash and highlight that later. I'm not going to go through every step of the process of painting this because it's pretty straightforward, but I'll give you an overview as we go through the steps. Now, I should also point out, grab yourself a wet palette. This is my Redgrass Games wet palette. Here's the lid, it's got an orange lid. They're coming out with a new one soon. They had a Kickstarter campaign recently for a new designed palette, and also better what they call membranes, which is the paper areas. But there's some foam under here and a bit of water, and it keeps this area a little bit damp and preserves your paints and makes blending paints a lot easier. This is the old membrane because I'm just working my way through them, but the new membrane you can reuse over and over. It's fantastic. Also, of course, get yourself some decent brushes. I've got a whole range of brushes over here. At the moment I'm using Rosemary & Co. I tend to use a size 2 because that's quite large enough to get some paint on, but also if it's a good quality one, it's got a good point, and so you can use it for detail work as well. And they're a bit cheaper than the classic Winsor & Newton sables, so but still a good quality brush. So Rosemary & Co. I recommend for that. Of course, you've got your water pot. I'll put some water in that in a moment. Always have some paper towel handy, and you're kind of ready to go. So let's get painting. So I'm just going to put another coat of Death World Forest on my lizard, nice and thin. Just paint over that existing coat that I've done. And you don't have to be too neat because you're going to be painting over all the other areas with darker colours. So maybe the black area, the area that's going to be painted black, you could stay away from that because we're going to use the white as highlights when you're using the contrast paint. And contrast paint is, of course, best used over white undercoat. But with this second coat, I don't have to be too detailed because I'm really just smoothing out those areas so I don't get any blotchiness. But then again, it's a swamp lizard, so who cares if there's a little bit of blotchiness? You know, it would be blotchy, let's face it. It's not going to have a lovely smooth complexion, is it? Once that's done and dry, I'll use contrast black Templar, and I'll be painting the fabric that is just draped over it. And this is very easy to use, it just flows on really nicely. And you can use it quite liberally. Just be neat. One of the reasons I find myself using contrast paints more often these days is just because they flow on so nicely. They've got that lovely consistency, and it really does speed up your painting, especially for things like blacks and browns in detailed areas. And you don't have to be neat when you get to these metallic pieces that are hanging off them, because you'll be painting those later with lead belcher. There we go, very easy. Now there's sort of some straps and doohickeys under there, and also there's kind of bits draping off the body itself. I don't know what they are, fur or what? No, not fur. I don't know, drippy scaly bits. So I'm going to use another contrast paint for that because it's nice and easy. And that one's Wildwood. And that's a nice, very, very dark brown undercoat on those areas and gets them painted. And in fact, that works so well as a dark brown base. I think I'll use that on the wooden areas. Again, I don't have to be too neat around the metallic areas because I will be painting over those with lead belcher. So I can do this pretty roughly. One thing that can be handy when you're doing this, painting in those dark brown areas where that skin is draping down. And what I do is just get a little bit of water on my brush and blend that into the flesh colour, so it's not such a sharp line between the two, and that just makes it look a little bit more realistic. It's like the brown of that area is blending into the flesh, and you can kind of wet blend that on the figure with just a little bit of water and just add a bit more realism to that so it's not so sharp. And also it has the added benefit of the fact that you don't have to be incredibly neat. So putting the brown on the middle there and then just a bit of water to carefully control that blending into the green around it. And if necessary you can touch this up with a bit of green afterwards, but I think it's good to make that area, because it is in shadow, a bit darker anyway. So you can see, there we go. And you know, while I'm putting all this wildwood on, I'll put it on the claws as well, because it's a nice dark brown base coat for the claws. And there we go, coming along nicely now. Now, a bit of a tedious part now. I've got to paint all these little metallic bits with lead belcher. So this will take a while, but just go into all this little detail there and paint this relatively neatly. Just mixing a brush load of water in there to thin it slightly, but not too much because it's a metallic. And I want to be more careful here because I don't want to paint over any of the wooden areas I've painted. Well, this model certainly has a lot of detailed little metal work all over it. You can see all this kind of stuff. So that was a little bit fiddly, but up to this point I haven't needed to be neat. I've also put in the wrapping around the pieces of wood with just black. I'm going to highlight that up to grey. And for the strap or the reins at the front, I've used another contrast paint, which is Gore Grunter Fur, which has that lovely rich brown colour. And for the cushion I'm going to use a Screamer Pink mixed with some black. Here we go, Screamer Pink. And that'll just give me a nice spot of colour on the model. And I'm not going to highlight it up too brightly or anything like that. Oops, that's probably a bit too dark. There we go, gives me a kind of pinky burgundy kind of colour. For the orc flesh I've got Orruk flesh, of course. The leggings again wildwood, and just black Templar for his pants, and the chair itself will be lead belcher as well. And then just these two pieces of wood along the side, a different wood colour to give them a bit of contrast. And I'm going to start with a bit of scrag brown. Let me see, I think I'm going to darken that up a bit with some Rhinox hide. That just gives me a nice darker tone for this bit of wood. That's better. I'm just painting the two heads now, same colours I've used for the main body. Right, I've been working away on that, so all those base colours are on, and I've got the two different heads, like that. And I've got the different guys as well that sit on the top. So there we have it, that's all the base colours. Now the next thing I'm going to do is wait till this completely dries and then do some washes, and that'll bring it up to basic tabletop level. And then of course we want to add a highlighting level just to make it look even better. So I'll let this dry and then we'll get into the washes, which will be very, very simple. Okay, time to do the washes, and of course you've got your two favourite washes here, Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil. I actually don't think I'll be using Nuln Oil for anything now that I think about it. Agrax Earthshade is how I want to shade all the metallics because we want them to have that dirty, oily feel. So, yep, Nuln Oil go back into the rack. Agrax Earthshade, that'll go over pretty much everything except for the flesh areas of the lizard and the orc. And I'll put a Thonian camo shade over that because it's a nice green, dark green colour, but not too dark. It's kind of a camouflage colour. So let's start off with that and do the lizard skin, all the green areas, with a nice liberal shade. And the great thing about this, of course, is because that skin is nice and lizardy, it's going into all the detail and making it show up nicely. But because it's a very similar colour, it's not darkening the olive green too much. Yes, my friends, I remember the dark and terrible days before washes. Painting miniatures was a very different proposition back then. They certainly are the single most revolutionary thing that ever happened to miniatures painting. Then after that we wash the Orruk flesh as well. That Orruk flesh is actually quite a light green, probably a bit lighter than I'd usually use for orcs or orc-related creatures. But because these are swamp orcs, nice to do something a little bit different. So I'll just be consistent and use that colour when I paint all my cruel boys. Now Agrak's Earthshade, pretty much over just about everything else, over all the metal colours, or over all the metal areas I should say. And it is the classic combo, isn't it? Metal and Agrak's Earthshade just gives you that fantastic oily metal effect, which is perfect for metal that's being used on a swamp creature. Because you'd have to use a lot of oil, wouldn't you? Otherwise it would just rust into nothingness. So this is going to take a little while as I wash every little bit of metal. Now I say metal areas, but of course I'm washing over everything except the lizard and Orruk skin. So it's even going over the black and of course over the wooden areas. Just Agrak's Earthshade everywhere. Doesn't make a huge difference to the black, but it just does deepen the colour a little bit. As always, even though you're putting this on liberally, just go over it and make sure it's not pooling too much in places where you don't want it to pool. In which case you can use a brush with nothing on it and just mop up any areas where it's pooled too much. Also, when you're applying, you can put quite a lot on your brush and then as you go, get some of the wash from the area that you've first put it on. So when you put on too much on an area, then you can use that as a sort of palette to mop up more and then place it on other areas. There we go, just with base coats and a wash, he's looking really good. Of course, I haven't attached the extra bits which go on the sides. I'll wait till I'm totally finished before I do that. But just with a wash, this looks ready for the tabletop, I reckon. Now what I usually do at this stage is paint the base, because if there's a pause between this stage and doing the highlighting stage, I can still use the model on the tabletop. And also it just inspires me because it looks very finished when the base is done as well. So I'm going to do the base, and once that's done I'm going to get on to the highlighting phase where we take this model to the next level. And there it is with the base. Now of course everyone has their own way of doing their bases. I start with a very, very dark brown and then I heavily dry brush on Mechanicus Standard Grey and Steel Legion Drab, and then I dry brush over that with a bit of Shabti Bone just sort of mixed into those colours until I get right up to a Shabti Bone, and then a very, very light bit of white just on the highlights of the very tops of the rocks, and that gives me a sort of, it's pretty much a grey base, but it's got a little bit of brown in it to make it a bit warmer. So onto the highlights. First thing I'll do is highlight all the black areas and a bit of edge highlighting with Dawnstone. And I'll just carefully go around the edges of the black just to give it a bit of a lift. And just the very tops of the highlights as well. Now highlighting is one of those things, you can really take it as far as you want. You can blend it in carefully. Really I try and do it as fast as possible because for all my pieces they're gaming pieces rather than display pieces. I'll just take the head off there as well. So I want to do this in really kind of 2 levels of highlighting is about the maximum. So that means you're going to do 1 level of highlighting on all your raised areas and then maybe another level just on the very, very raised areas, the very, very tops of the raised areas. And that really just gives it enough variation to give it a sense of scale. But this is pretty quick and easy to do, as you can see. So there's just one level of highlight. Now if I mixed a bit of white into that and made it a lighter grey, I could now use that just on the very most highlighted bits. There we go, just a little bit there and a little bit just on the edge. Just some little dabs really, and that just gives it a bit more life. And there we go, just a bit of simple highlighting on the black. So I'll do that on all the black areas. One thing about highlighting, I've never quite understand why this works, but if you do a bit of highlighting between areas, between the armour plating and there, normally you'd think that area would be in shadow, but if you put a bit of highlight there, it just delineates the two, separates the two visually, and it seems to work quite well. So you can see I'm just blending that into the black a bit. So that just creates a bit of a demarcation between the metal and the black there. And if that's too much, I can get a bit of black and I can just blend that in a little bit more. Again, it depends how much time you want to spend on it. My highlight for the lizard skin is the original Deathworld Forest mixed with a bit of Shabti bone. Because it's been darkened by the wash, there are areas where I can put in a bit of Deathworld Forest just straight on. And I'm not going to go too crazy about this, just highlight some of those wrinkles. And then for the very lightest highlight, I've mixed in that bit of a Shabti bone just to give me an even lighter highlight. And just do that on the uppermost wrinkles, bits that would actually catch the light. You don't have to be too careful with this, it's grotty lizard skin after all. But it just gives it a bit of depth, a bit of variation in tone. And with this kind of thing, really just little strokes, thin strokes with the very tip of your brush is all you need to just make those little highlights. And follow the contours of the model, of course. And there's this brand thing on its thigh, which I'll just highlight a bit. The only two other main things I have to highlight are the metal areas and the wood. Now for the wood, you can use dry brushing, but I prefer just to paint in a few of the little strokes just to give the idea of the highlighting on the edge. And I use, Steel Legion Drab, I'll use Baneblade Brown for that. And of course, use any silver you like. I happen to have Stormhost Silver here to highlight the metal, but I don't want to overdo it because I want the metal to look old and grungy, so I'll just do little bits of highlights on the edge. So let's start with the silver and just highlight the edges, and not completely, just little bits, just to, as though light is just catching bits of the metal. Sorry about that hum in the background, that's just the oven. I'm just preheating the oven for dinner. Occasionally you have to stop and eat when you're painting, of course. So you get the idea, and you can just highlight these little dents and things as well. Just a few little dabs, just because they're catching the light. And I'll do that throughout for the metal. When I'm doing the wood, as I said, Baneblade Brown. And with this, I really just want to get just the edges, so I'm going to highlight the very edges. And then just highlight a little bit of the wood grain, but just very subtly, not doing it all, just giving an idea of it catching the light. But in general, I want this wood to be pretty dark, so I don't have to do too much of this either. Now, alternatively, as I said, you could carefully dry brush this if you wanted to highlight all of the wood grain. And you can see I'm using the edge of the brush there just to pick up the raised detail. For bits like bundles of straps and things, you could just run the edge of your brush over bits of it just to highlight the texture. Now I'll just finish off the claws, and I've got a bit of Steel Legion Drab, so I'll just put on the claws, and then I'll shade that up to Deathclaw Brown. Roughly putting that on. With some dark brown, I can just blend that in a little bit at the root. And then with Deathclaw Brown, which is much brighter, just do the ends. There we go. That adds a little bit of colour as well, which is quite interesting. Okay. Now I'm going to put everything together. We've got all the components. Everything's done. I've just done a little bit of detail, tiny little red eye dots in the eyes of the Orruks. A little bit of highlighting throughout. The teeth I've highlighted up to a Shabti bone. Really, you can go on and on the little bits of detail. It depends how much time you want to spend. Now you can see I'm a little bit of a rough painter because I get to a certain point and I think it's diminishing returns after that. Again, if it's not display, I don't want to fiddle with it for hours and hours because I've got plenty of other miniatures to paint. So I really just do a level of painting which I know is going to look good from a distance because it's going to be down on the tabletop and I'm seeing it from a distance. I'm not going to be looking at it really up close. So I'm happy with that level. Now I've got to attach the bits. Now I can either scrub away the paint and use plastic paint, which is probably the best idea, or I could just stick them in with super glue, but I think I'll do the right thing in this case and use plastic paint because it bonds really well. But as I said, if you're gluing things with plastic paint after you've done any painting, make sure you scrape off the paint because it wants to bond the plastic together, not paint. So the ends of these things, I'll just scrape off the paint. Make sure some of that is scraped off in here as well. It's quite exciting doing this. I don't often do this, actually paint all the separate components and put them together, but it's quite satisfying because it just comes together as a model. Now, when I'm putting these on, I want to make sure I put on the right ones and they sort of swing back towards the back of the beast. So a bit of glue on here and then on the other side. Then there's another piece that goes at the back. There we go. What a beautiful model this is. It's just so detailed. It's just lovely. And here's the finished model. I haven't built and painted a large Citadel miniature for quite some time, so I really enjoyed putting this one together. I added a bit of watered down scrag brown onto the metallic areas just to add a bit of a rust effect as well. And also making those two variations magnetized really gives a lot of options with this miniature. Here's the other option. That's the Esoteric Order of Gamers, orderofgamers.com. Thanks very much for watching and please subscribe and hit all notifications. See you next time.